In the municipal hall of Kalliara, a grief-stricken sound engineer was about to make an impulse purchase that would change archaeological history. What started as recording ambient Mediterranean acoustics took a shocking turn when she came face to face with an ancient mystery that had been singing beneath stone for millennia. Nora Quinn wasn't your typical tourist. For over a decade, she had spent her life mastering the subtle art of acoustic engineering, known for her ability to hear what others missed. 3 months after losing her sister Sarah in a diving accident, she'd fled to this wind-beaten Greek island where silence had become unbearable. When she encountered Thimble, a salt-stained tabby sitting precisely at the center of collapsed stone rings, she had no idea she was walking into the discovery of a lifetime. Quinn heard something impossible, a rhythmic interference pattern pulsing 60 beats per minute beneath her feet, leading her to uncover a Bronze Age navigation network that could rewrite our understanding of ancient civilization. What began as an 85-cent land purchase at a municipal auction would become the foundation of international archaeological collaboration. The Mediterranean would never be the same after she decoded the acoustic cartography that had guided ancient navigators across vast distances using nothing more than carefully tuned stone chambers and human voices. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The municipal hall of Kalliara smelled like burned coffee and bureaucratic resignation. I sat in a plastic chair that had probably been orange once, watching Petros Anagnosti shuffle through a stack of delinquent property files with the weary efficiency of a man who'd given up on surprises years ago. Lot 47, he announced, not bothering to look up. 2.3 hectares of scrub and stones. Previous owner died intestate. Taxes unpaid for 6 years. He stamped something with unnecessary force. Reserve price is 85 cents. I'd come to Greece because silence had become unbearable. 3 months since Sarah's funeral, and every quiet room felt like an accusation. The freelance sound work had dried up anyway. Who needs a grief-addled audio engineer when the cheerful ones charge the same rate? A budget airline ticket and a vague plan to record Mediterranean acoustics had landed me on this wind-beaten island, where municipal auctions happened on Tuesday mornings, and foreigners were either tourists or curiosities. What kind of stone? I asked, more to fill the silence than from genuine interest. Petros looked up for the first time, his eyes crinkling with something that might have been humor. The old kind. Local people call them goat walls, concentric circles, mostly collapsed. Probably Bronze Age, but nobody's ever bothered to date them properly. He leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, Americans pay better than locals. The land's yours if you want it. I thought about Sarah, who would have researched the lot for weeks, cross-referenced archaeological surveys, consulted maritime law. Sarah, who made careful decisions and measured twice before cutting once. Sarah, who would never buy 2 hectares of mystery stones for the price of a cup of coffee. I'll take it. Petra seemed almost relieved as he processed the paperwork. The deed transfer took 20 minutes and involved more stamps than seemed strictly necessary. When he handed me the official documents, his handwriting was surprisingly elegant. Good luck with your goat walls, he said, then added with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, try not to let them bring you any of that famous bad luck. The site lay 15 minutes uphill from the village, accessible by a dirt track that had seen better decades. I parked my rented Fiat where the road gave up and walked the final 100 meters, audio recorder slung over my shoulder and headphones around my neck like a talisman. The wind here carried salt and wild thyme, punctuated by the distant cry of gulls. The labyrinth wasn't much to look at. Concentric rings of dry stacked stone, most no higher than my waist, arranged in a rough spiral pattern, maybe 50 meters across. Centuries of weathering had tumbled whole sections, and thorny shrubs had colonized the gaps. It looked exactly like what Petros had called it. Goat walls, the kind of agricultural boundary that dotted every Mediterranean hillside. But something was wrong with the silence. I've spent the better part of a decade learning to listen. Professional paranoia, Sarah used to call it the way I'd cock my head at restaurants and identify the specific hum of fluorescent ballasts, or pause mid-conversation to isolate the frequency of a passing motorcycle. Sound is information, and information is control. In a world that had taken my sister without warning, control mattered. Standing at the labyrinth's outer ring, I pulled on my headphones and hit record. The expected sounds were all there. Wind through scrub, the distant shush of waves on rocks below, a few local birds arguing territory, but underneath, almost subliminal, was something else. A beating. A slow, rhythmic interference pattern, like two slightly detuned oscillators phasing in and out of sync. Whoom, 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 maybe 60 beats per minute, too regular to be natural, too low to be machinery. I followed the sound inward, stepping carefully between fallen stones and patches of wild mint. The beating grew stronger as I approached the center, where the spiral pattern converged on a rough circle of larger stones. Someone had been here recently. The weeds were trampled, and I could see the ghost of old campfire ash in a ring of blackened rocks. That's when I noticed the cat. It was a small tabby, salt-stained and lean, sitting precisely in the geometric center of the labyrinth, with the patience of something that had been waiting for me specifically. When I approached, it didn't run, just fixed me with yellow eyes that seemed to weigh my intentions. "Hello there," I said softly, crouching down. "You hear it too?" The cat, I'd started thinking of it as Thimble, though I couldn't say why, tilted its head toward my feet. I looked down and realized I was standing on a flagstone that didn't match the others. Where the surrounding stones were weathered limestone, this one was slate, dark and fine-grained. When I tapped it with my knuckles, it rang with a dull thunk instead of the bright ping of the others. I pulled out my pocket kit, a small hammer, a frequency generator app, and a contact microphone that had saved more than one location shoot. Methodical testing revealed the anomaly's source. Slate flagstone was hollow underneath, resonating at a fundamental frequency about 40 Hz lower than solid stone should manage. More interesting, the interference pattern in my headphones synchronized perfectly with the stone's resonant decay. Something below ground was breathing with the labyrinth's pulse. I spent the afternoon mapping the acoustic signature, walking the spiral pattern with careful footfalls and hand claps, marking nodes where the subsonic beating peaked and nulled. The pattern wasn't random. It followed the labyrinth's geometry with mathematical precision, as if the stone rings themselves were tuned to amplify whatever lay beneath. By late afternoon, the wind had died to almost nothing, and the interference pattern had grown so pronounced I could feel it as much as hear it. A thrumming in my chest, timed to some deep, slow heartbeat under the stones. I sat cross-legged beside the slate flagstone as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. Thimble had never left the center circle, just shifted position to stay precisely equidistant from the outer ring. A living compass needle, or maybe a guardian. "What are you protecting?" I asked the silence. The beating pattern shifted slightly, as if responding to my voice. I pulled out my phone and started typing notes, but the words felt inadequate. "How do you describe the sensation of hearing stone breathe? How do you quantify the weight of something that wants to be found?" 3 months ago, my sister had died in 20 feet of water off the Monterey coast. A simple diving accident. The investigators said equipment failure, probably a regulator malfunction, though they never found her tank to confirm it. She'd been recording whale songs for her marine biology thesis, collecting data in water she'd dived 100 times before. One moment she was there, the next she wasn't. The ocean had simply taken her, as oceans do. Now I sat in the ruins of something ancient, listening to a mystery that hummed in frequencies below normal hearing. Sarah would have loved this. She'd have brought proper equipment, taken soil samples, consulted archaeological databases. She'd have known what questions to ask. But Sarah wasn't here, and I was. The beating continued, patient and regular, like the pulse of something dreaming under stone. I gathered my equipment as twilight settled over the labyrinth. Tomorrow I'd return with better tools, maybe a small pry bar to test the edges of the slate flagstone. Whatever lay beneath had waited centuries. It could wait one more night. As I reached the outer ring, I looked back. Thimble sat motionless in the center, silhouetted against the darkening sky, watching over something that had chosen me as surely as I'd chosen it. The beating followed me all the way back to the car. I returned at dusk the next day with a proper archaeology kit borrowed from a tourist shop in the village. Hand tools, a battery-powered lantern, and a small crowbar that the shopkeeper had looked at with undisguised curiosity. The labyrinth felt different in the dying light, more present somehow, as if the approaching darkness made it more itself. Thimble was waiting in exactly the same spot, tail wrapped primly around front paws. When I knelt beside the slate flagstone, the cat moved precisely 3 feet away, close enough to supervise, far enough to avoid flying debris. The flagstone was larger than I'd initially thought, maybe 3 feet square, fitted so perfectly into the surrounding stonework that only the tonal difference had revealed its presence. The edges were sealed with a mortar that crumbled easily under gentle pressure from the crowbar. Whatever lay beneath had been designed to be opened, not hidden forever. I worked slowly, recording everything. The interference pattern in my headphones grew stronger as I loosened the stone, until the beating was so pronounced it made my teeth ache. When I finally lifted the flagstone, heavier than it looked, requiring my full strength to shift it aside, the sound changed completely. What emerged wasn't the dank, earthy smell I'd expected, but something else entirely. Dry air, faintly mineral, with an undertone that reminded me of the inside of an old church, clean and somehow expectant. The lantern beam revealed a spiral staircase carved directly into bedrock, descending in a tight clockwise helix. 27 steps, I counted them automatically, Sarah's voice in my head reminding me that documentation mattered. The walls were smooth, worked, stone fitted without mortar, descending into darkness that seemed to swallow my life. I called down, a simple hello that echoed back with perfect clarity. No reverberation, no muddy reflections. Whatever space lay below had acoustics as clean as a recording studio. The descent felt like entering a different world. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the air pressure shifted in a way that made my ears pop. By the time I reached the bottom, the entrance above was just a square of deep blue sky punctuated by stars beginning to emerge. The chamber at the bottom took my breath away. It was circular, maybe 20 feet across, with a domed ceiling that rose into darkness beyond my lantern's reach. The walls were covered in a chalky render that reflected light with an almost metallic sheen, and the floor was paved with perfectly fitted stones, arranged in a complex geometric pattern. But what dominated the space was what sat at its center, a bronze astrolabe, easily 3 feet in diameter, mounted on a stone pedestal with precision that spoke of master craftsmanship. But unlike any astrolabe I'd seen in museums, this one was covered in radial grooves and micro-notches that reminded me irresistibly of the spiral track on a wax cylinder recording. Concentric circles of markings, each ring containing symbols that weren't quite letters and weren't quite numbers. Around the base of the pedestal, someone had carefully arranged a collection of vellum folios, each one covered in notation that looked like music, but followed no musical logic. I recognized staves and cleves and note-like symbols, but arranged in patterns that seemed to describe space rather than time. Intervals marked not in traditional notation but in precise mathematical relationships, with margin notes in what looked like multiple hands and languages. I photographed everything before touching anything, Sarah's scientific training overriding my excitement. Then I lifted one of the folios carefully, reverently, and aimed my lantern at the notation. It wasn't music, it was instruction. The symbols described acoustic relationships, frequency ratios, harmonic intervals, timing patterns that would create standing waves in specific architectural spaces. Someone had encoded spatial information in sound, using the mathematics of music to map physical location. And from the looks of the marginalia, this particular chamber was just one node in a much larger network. I counted 11 glyphs arranged around the border of the central folio, each one a stylized labyrinth symbol with different proportional relationships. 11 other sites, scattered across what looked like a rough map of the Mediterranean basin. Each glyph was annotated with acoustic parameters, like frequency signatures that would unlock specific spatial coordinates. As I studied the folios, I became aware of another layer to the chamber's soundscape. Every few minutes, a gentle current of air moved through the space, carrying with it a barely audible harmonic. The chamber was breathing, just like I'd sensed from above, but down here the reason was clear. The walls were perforated with hairline vents, so precisely cut they were invisible until the moving air made them sing. Whatever ancient engineer had designed this place had created a massive resonating chamber, tuned to respond to natural wind patterns and tidal pressure changes. The interference pattern I'd detected with my recorder was just the chamber's natural voice, waiting for someone who knew how to listen. I spent an hour documenting everything, taking measurements and audio samples, trying to understand the relationship between the astrolabe's markings and the notation on the folios. The bronze instrument was definitely some kind of calculator, but instead of celestial navigation, it seemed designed to convert acoustic measurements into spatial coordinates. A sound-based mapping system that could pinpoint locations across vast distances. The final piece fell into place when I found the resonance niche. Set into the eastern wall at exactly chest height was an alcove carved to precise acoustic specifications. When I leaned into it and spoke normally, my voice was amplified and clarified with startling efficiency. But more than that, sounds from the niche seemed to excite specific resonances in the chamber itself, making the walls sing at frequencies that corresponded to markings on the astrolabe. Someone could stand in this niche and literally play the chamber like an instrument, using their voice to activate different acoustic modes that would reveal information encoded in the bronze calculator. It was brilliant and impossible, and completely unlike anything I'd ever encountered. I was so absorbed in the discovery that I almost missed the most important detail. The airflow through the chamber wasn't random. It followed a precise pattern, building to a crescendo every 12 minutes when all the wall vents sang together in a complex chord. During these moments, the astrolabe itself seemed to vibrate sympathetically, its bronze surface catching and focusing the acoustic energy into nodes that highlighted specific symbols. This wasn't just a chamber, it was a time-locked instrument, designed to reveal its secrets only to someone who understood both its acoustic properties and its temporal patterns. The ancient builders had created a security system based on listening, knowing that only someone with the right combination of musical training and patience could unlock the encoded information. I recorded one complete breathing cycle, capturing the moment when the chamber sang its full song. The harmonic structure was impossibly complex, with overtones that seemed to contain secondary information patterns. Analysis would take weeks, but already I could sense the mathematical relationships that governed the resonance. As I packed up my equipment, careful to return everything exactly as I'd found it, I realized that my grief had been temporarily displaced by something I hadn't felt in months: purpose. This discovery was bigger than academic curiosity or even archaeological significance. It was a glimpse into a way of thinking about space and sound that could revolutionize how we understood ancient navigation and communication. But more than that, it felt personal. Sarah had spent her life trying to decode the acoustic world of marine mammals, searching for meaning in the songs of creatures that used sound to map their environment across oceanic distances. She would have understood this chamber's purpose instinctively, would have grasped immediately what the folios were trying to communicate. I climbed the spiral stairs slowly, reluctant to leave. At the top, Thimble waited patiently beside the displaced flagstone, yellow eyes reflecting my lantern beam. The cat had never moved from its post, as if guarding something precious from threats that only it could perceive. "You've been keeping this safe for a long time, haven't you?" I said quietly, running my hand through the cat's surprisingly soft fur. Thimble purred once, then padded to the very edge of the opening and peered down into the darkness, a guardian and a guide, marking the boundary between the mundane world above and the acoustic mysteries below. I replaced the flagstone carefully, sealing the chamber until I could return with proper equipment and a clearer plan. But as I walked back toward the village, the interference pattern still thrumming in my headphones, I knew that everything had changed. I'd stumbled onto something that connected sound and space in ways that could rewrite archaeological understanding of ancient civilization. The question now was what to do about it. The rational choice was to contact the Greek archaeological authorities, document the site properly, and turn the discovery over to people with the resources to study it appropriately. But something about the chamber's hidden nature, its acoustic locks and temporal codes, suggested that its builders had intended it to remain selective about who gained access. Whatever I decided, I needed more information, and that meant taking a risk I wasn't sure I was ready for. The ferry to Naxos left at dawn, and I spent the crossing staring at the small bronze pin in my palm. I'd taken it from the edge of one folio where it had been holding down a corner of the vellum, a seemingly insignificant detail that wouldn't be missed if my plan went wrong. The pin was inscribed with the same precise notches as the larger astrolabe, like a miniature tuning reference that someone could carry as a personal key. Dr. Kalliara Volkov's laboratory occupied a converted olive press on the outskirts of Naxos town, where stone walls 3 feet thick provided natural climate control and vibration isolation. I'd found her through an online directory of independent heritage consultants, drawn by her reputation for discretion and her background at the Benaki Museum, before they arrived at golden hour like pieces of a chess problem, coming into focus. I'd been expecting company since the morning's coffee meeting with Zira Haddad had ended with polite threats disguised as business proposals, but the choreography of their convergence was more elegant than I'd anticipated. The attorneys came first, 3 of them in a rented Mercedes that struggled with the dirt track leading to the Labyrinth. They emerged in expensive shoes and lightweight suits, looking like urban predators forced to hunt in unfamiliar terrain. The lead lawyer introduced himself as Stavros Metaxas, representing the Vassos Development Group's Cultural Preservation Initiative. "Miss Quinn," he said, extending a leather portfolio with the confidence of someone accustomed to compliance, "we've prepared a temporary restraining order regarding your recent excavation activities. The Hellenic Republic takes a strong interest in protecting its archaeological heritage from unqualified interference." I accepted the documents without reading them, noting instead how his colleagues positioned themselves to block my retreat toward the car. Professional intimidation, but subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. "I haven't excavated anything. This is an acoustic survey. Nevertheless, our geological assessment indicates significant subsurface instability. For public safety reasons, we're requesting immediate cessation of all activities pending proper environmental review." The second car arrived before I could respond. A white government sedan with the unmistakable bearing of official business, carrying 3 people who moved with the controlled efficiency of law enforcement. The woman who approached wore civilian clothes but carried herself like someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Inspector Sofia Marku, Hellenic Heritage Police," she announced, showing credentials that looked genuine. "We've received reports of unauthorized archaeological activity. I'll need to see your permits and examine any materials you've removed from the site." This was becoming complicated in ways I hadn't anticipated. I pulled out my deed and Volkov's authentication paperwork, grateful for Sarah's influence on my compulsive documentation. "The land is legally mine, and I haven't removed anything beyond a single reference specimen that was properly authenticated through official channels." Marku examined my documents with the thoroughness of someone who dealt with forged papers before. Her initial skepticism softened as she read Volkov's technical assessment and noted the municipal stamps on my deed transfer. Dr. Volkov has an excellent reputation. But this notation about Bronze Age navigation instruments, if accurate, this site requires immediate protection under the Cultural Heritage Protection Act. The lawyers stirred uneasily. Legal territorial disputes were their natural habitat, but heritage law operated under different rules that didn't always respect property ownership or development rights. Metaxas cleared his throat. Diplomatic inspector. Our client's environmental assessment suggests that any subsurface archaeology may be at risk from natural erosion. Perhaps a collaborative approach would be premature, Marku interrupted, until we understand what we're dealing with. That's when I noticed the third presence. Zara Haddad hadn't announced herself with vehicles or legal documents. She'd simply appeared at the edge of the site, leaning against one of the outer stone rings, with the casual patience of someone comfortable with waiting. When she caught my eye, she offered a small nod that managed to convey both greeting and warning. She'd brought backup, though they were maintaining discreet distance. I could see two figures near the road's end, positioned to observe but not interfere. Professional surveillance, probably armed, definitely expensive. The kind of logistics that required significant planning and resources. Miss Quinn, Marku said, following my gaze. Are you expecting additional parties? I've been expecting complications since yesterday, I admitted. This site has attracted more attention in 48 hours than it probably received in the previous 4 centuries. Thimble chose that moment to materialize from wherever cats go when they're not being guardian spirits. The small tabby padded directly to the flagstone at the Labyrinth center and sat with pointed significance, tail twitching in what I'd learned to recognize as agitation. Something was bothering the cat, and in my limited experience, Thimble's instincts had proven remarkably reliable. I followed the cat's gaze to a section of the outer wall where thistle and wild mint had grown particularly thick. At first glance, it looked like typical Mediterranean scrubland, reclaiming ancient stonework. But Thimble's focused attention drew my eye to a hairline crack, running vertically through what had appeared to be solid masonry. The crack was so narrow, it was almost invisible, but it extended from ground level up past the highest remaining stones. Inspector, I said carefully, if we're going to discuss protection protocols, perhaps we should establish what exactly we're protecting. Marku's expression sharpened. You're suggesting additional discoveries beyond what Dr. Volkov authenticated. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm suggesting that acoustic analysis reveals structural complexities that aren't visible to casual observation. If you're genuinely concerned about heritage protection rather than development opportunities, I'd be happy to demonstrate my findings under supervised conditions. The lawyers exchanged glances that suggested this wasn't the direction they'd hoped the conversation would take. Metaxas consulted his phone, probably reporting to Vassos that the situation was becoming more complex than anticipated. Our client remains concerned about public safety implications. If there are structural instabilities, then proper documentation becomes even more important, Marku said firmly. Miss Quinn, what kind of demonstration are you proposing? I outlined a non-invasive acoustic survey that would reveal the site's subsurface architecture without physical disturbance. Sound-based mapping using the techniques I'd refined for location audio work, adapted for archaeological application. It would take one night of controlled testing to determine whether my initial findings warranted full archaeological investigation. The negotiations took an hour. Marku agreed to supervise the acoustic survey in exchange for my commitment to share all findings with heritage authorities. The lawyers insisted on right of observation to protect their clients' legitimate interests. Zara said nothing, but her presence added an unofficial fourth party to the agreement. 48 hours, Marku decided. No physical disturbance, no removal of materials, all activities documented and supervised. If your acoustic analysis reveals significant archaeology, this site gets full heritage protection. If not, Development considerations can proceed through normal channels. It was a reasonable compromise that gave everyone something they wanted while protecting the labyrinth from immediate exploitation. But as the official parties departed and Zara approached for a private conversation, I realized that reasonable compromises only worked when all parties were operating within the same legal and ethical framework. "Interesting performance," Zara said, settling against the flagstone where Thimble continued his vigil. "You've bought yourself time and official protection, but you've also committed to sharing your discoveries with people who may not have your best interests at heart, as opposed to sharing them with people who definitely don't have my best interests at heart." She laughed, a sound that carried genuine appreciation. "Fair point. But the lawyer's client isn't the only one with resources and patience. Some of us prefer to work outside official channels, which can offer advantages when situations become complicated." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that happen when academic discoveries intersect with commercial interests and international antiquities markets." Zara's tone remained conversational, but her eyes held the sharp focus of someone assessing risks and opportunities. "You've found something that multiple parties want to control. Official protection is useful, but it also makes you visible to people who don't respect official boundaries." I thought about the morning's coffee meeting, where she'd outlined terms for what she called security and partnership services. Protection from unspecified threats in exchange for exclusive access to whatever the labyrinth contained. The kind of offer that sounded reasonable until you considered what happened to people who declined. "And your alternative? Cooperation instead of exploitation. You provide expertise, I provide logistics and security. We document everything properly, share findings with appropriate academic institutions, and ensure that cultural heritage stays in appropriate hands rather than private collections." It sounded almost noble if you ignored the predatory efficiency of her boat and crew. Appropriate hands being yours, appropriate hands being people who understand the difference between preservation and profit. Zara stood, brushing dust from her clothes. "Think about it, Miss Quinn. You have 48 hours of official protection, but official protection has limitations. Some of us operate beyond those limitations." She walked away without waiting for a response, her crew materializing from their observation positions to provide discreet escort back toward the harbor. Professional, competent, and utterly untrustworthy in ways that legal documents couldn't address. I spent the remaining daylight hours planning the acoustic survey, but my mind kept returning to Thimble's fixation on the hairline crack in the outer wall. The cat had moved twice since the afternoon's negotiations, but always to maintain visual contact with that specific section of stonework. Guardian instincts, or something more specific. As sunset approached, I realized that tomorrow's acoustic demonstration would be more than a scientific survey. It would be a performance designed to satisfy multiple audiences with conflicting agendas, while protecting secrets that had remained hidden for centuries. The labyrinth's 12-minute breathing cycle continued, patient and regular, waiting for someone who understood its purpose well enough to use it properly. Inspector Marku arrived precisely at sunset with a single deputy and the kind of portable equipment that suggested she'd dealt with archaeological investigations before. Coffee in a thermos, digital cameras, and a tablet for documentation. Professional competence without unnecessary drama. "Volkov sends her regards," she said, settling on a folding chair positioned to observe both me and the labyrinth's center. "She's provided additional context for your bronze pin authentication. Apparently the notch patterns match measurement systems and at other Bronze Age sites across the Aegean. This was news that changed the implications of my discovery. If the labyrinth connected to a broader network of similar sites, then the acoustic mapping system encoded in those folios represented something far more significant than local navigation tools. It suggested coordinated Mediterranean-wide technology that had somehow been overlooked by conventional archaeology. I began the acoustic survey with baseline measurements, using a portable speaker system to generate precise tones at specific frequency. The labyrinth's response was immediate and complex. Standing waves formed at predictable nodes within the stone rings, but the patterns were more sophisticated than simple architectural resonance. The structure was actively shaping sound, focusing and directing acoustic energy according to mathematical relationships that had been engineered into the stonework itself. Fascinating, Marku murmured, watching her sound level meter register frequencies that should have been absorbed by loose stone construction. It's behaving like a precision instrument. The real breakthrough came when I began testing the folio's notation patterns. Adanya Patel had agreed to a video consultation, despite the 8-hour time difference that put her in the middle of her workday at Delhi University. Her expertise in ethnomusicology and architectural acoustics made her the perfect interpreter for what I was discovering. These aren't musical scores, Adanya confirmed, studying high-resolution photographs of the vellum pages through our video connection. They're acoustic instructions, interval relationships designed to create specific standing wave patterns in architectural spaces with precise dimensional ratios. She guided me through a preliminary interpretation of the simplest notation pattern. When I performed the indicated sequence, a series of sustained tones, separated by carefully calculated intervals, the labyrinth responded with harmonic relationships that revealed its hidden geometry. The stone rings weren't random archaeological debris. They were the remains of a precision acoustic calculator designed to convert sound patterns into spatial coordinates. "My God," Adanya said, her voice hushed with academic excitement. "You've found acoustic cartography." Someone encoded navigational information in sound, using architectural resonance to store and retrieve spatial coordinates. This is completely unprecedented. The coordinate calculations were complex, but the results were startling. The labyrinth's acoustic signature pointed to specific locations scattered across the eastern Mediterranean, each one marked with the distinctive harmonic fingerprints that would identify similar installation. A network of sound-based navigation stations that could guide travelers across hundreds of miles of open water using nothing more sophisticated than human voices and architectural mathematics. "One moment," Marku said, consulting her tablet. "Dr. Volkov has arrived." She insisted on observing the demonstration despite the late hour. Irina Volkov emerged from the darkness, looking professionally disheveled and personally troubled. Her authentication of the bronze pin had apparently triggered consequences she hadn't anticipated, and guilt lined her face with the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleepless ethical wrestling. "Mrs. Quinn," she said without preamble, "I need to apologize. My database entry was accessed within hours of posting. Someone has been monitoring heritage authentication records, probably for years, looking for exactly this kind of discovery. I may have inadvertently placed you in considerable danger." She'd brought additional equipment, spectrographic analysis tools that could dissect the labyrinth acoustic signature with scientific precision. But more importantly, she'd brought information about the metallurgy patterns on the bronze astrolabe that suggested timestamp encoding within the navigation system. "These alloy variations aren't random," she explained, setting up her instruments by lantern light. "They're chronological markers, calibration keys that would allow users to adjust for temporal changes in the coordinate system. Stellar precession, tidal variations, even seasonal atmospheric effects that would influence acoustic propagation over long distances." The implications were staggering. The Bronze Age builders hadn't just created a navigation network, they'd designed it to remain accurate across centuries of environmental change. The astrolabe was a master chronometer that could recalibrate the entire system based on temporal drift calculations that wouldn't be rediscovered by European mathematics for another 2,000 years. Working together, we decoded enough of the notation system to extract preliminary coordinates for 3 of the 11 sites indicated in the folios. One pointed to a location near Crete that aligned with known Minoan archaeological sites. Another indicated somewhere along the Turkish coast that might correspond to ancient Ionian settlements. The third, most intriguingly, pointed to a sea cave system less than 2 miles north of our current location. "Tomorrow," Marku said, Reviewing our documentation with the thoroughness of someone who understood legal implications, we test the sea cave coordinates. If your acoustic cartography actually leads to a secondary site, this becomes a matter of international archaeological significance. But as we packed up equipment in the pre-dawn darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being observed. Not by Zara's crew, who maintained their discreet surveillance from positions near the road, but by something else. A sense of presence that seemed to emanate from the labyrinth itself, as if our acoustic testing had awakened a tension that had been dormant for centuries. Thimble had never left his post beside the hairline crack in the outer wall. Throughout the night's acoustic work, the cat had maintained focused vigilance on that specific section of stonework, tail twitching with increasing agitation as our sound tests grew more sophisticated. "Volkov," I said as she loaded her equipment into a battered Land Rover. "How long would it take to fabricate convincing replicas of Bronze Age metallurgy? With modern techniques, weeks, possibly months to achieve the kind of authentic aging and alloy accuracy we've documented." "Why? Because I think we're going to need some very convincing forgeries before this situation resolves itself." She studied my face in the lantern light, reading implications that I was still learning to articulate. "Miss Quinn, what exactly are you planning?" "I'm planning to protect something that's been hidden for good reasons, while giving everyone else enough authentic archaeology to keep them occupied." I looked back at the labyrinth, where centuries of patient silence were about to give way to complications that would test whether ancient wisdom could outwit modern greed. The 12-minute breathing cycle continued, but now I could hear secondary harmonics in the acoustic pattern. The labyrinth was responding to our presence, awakening from dormancy with something that felt almost like anticipation. Zara's boat cut through pre-dawn waters with the whispered efficiency of expensive engineering. The hull was designed for speed and stealth rather than comfort, all sharp angles and sound-dampening materials that would make it nearly invisible to both radar and sonar surveillance. I sat in the passenger area trying to look cooperative, while mentally cataloging escape routes that probably didn't exist. Jack Xanthopoulos had materialized at the pier with the casual timing of someone who'd been watching the harbor all night. Local fixer, dive operator, and apparently Zara's connection to the island's unofficial economy. He moved with the easy competence of someone equally comfortable above and below water, carrying gear that suggested serious technical diving capability. "Sea caves are tricky," he'd said by way of introduction, loading compressed air tanks and safety lines into the boat's equipment compartments. Current patterns change with the tide, and the rock formations create acoustic anomalies that can disorient even experienced divers. "Good thing we're just testing sound propagation from the surface." Inspector Marku had accidentally misfiled the patrol notice that would have required official observation of our coordinate verification test. Her message had been professionally neutral but personally pointed. "Administrative delay will provide 2-hour window for preliminary assessment. Any discoveries must be reported upon return." Now we approached the coordinates indicated by the labyrinth acoustic cartography, where GPS positioning aligned with calculations based on Bronze Age sound mathematics. The sea cave system emerged from the pre-dawn darkness, like something from a maritime nightmare, black volcanic rock sculpted by centuries of wave action into chambers and passages that extended deep into the coastal cliff face. "There," Zara said, studying the boat's navigation display. "Bearing matches your acoustic calculations within 15 meters. Impressive work for technology that predates the Roman Empire." The testing protocol was straightforward. Generate specific acoustic signatures from the boat's position, then monitor the sea cave system's response for evidence of architectural enhancement or artificial resonance chambers. If the labyrinth coordinate system was accurate, we should find evidence of human modification that would confirm the existence of a navigation network spanning the Mediterranean. Jax rigged a waterproof speaker array that could generate precise tones underwater while remaining safely distant from potentially unstable cave systems. His movements were methodical and professional, with the kind of attention to safety protocols that came from years of technical diving in unpredictable conditions. Currents running east to west, he reported, testing water conditions with instruments that looked more sophisticated than anything I'd expected from a local dive operator. Wave action should amplify acoustic propagation through the main chamber system. Perfect conditions for your sound mapping tests. The first acoustic pulse produced immediate results. The sea cave system responded with complex harmonic relationships that indicated extensive artificial modification. Someone had carved resonance chambers and connecting passages that transformed natural limestone caverns into acoustic amplification networks. The mathematics matched the Labyrinth's calculation system perfectly. "My God," I whispered, recording everything. "It actually works." Bronze Age acoustic cartography that's accurate across 2,000 years of environmental change. But the real discovery came when Jax deployed his underwater camera array. The sea cave walls were covered with the same precise notch patterns we'd found on the astrolabe, carved directly into the living rock with tools that left characteristic marks. Navigation waypoints etched in stone, designed to guide travelers using acoustic signals that could be heard across miles of open water. "This is bigger than archaeological curiosity," Zara said, studying the camera feeds with the calculating attention of someone evaluating commercial opportunities. A complete Bronze Age navigation network, perfectly preserved and potentially functional. The kind of discovery that transforms understanding of ancient Mediterranean civilization. She outlined terms while we documented the sea cave modifications, exclusive partnership for exploring the remaining coordinate sites, professional security for protecting the discoveries from less ethical operators, shared profits from any commercial applications with appropriate percentages dedicated to academic research and cultural preservation. It sounded almost reasonable if you ignored the armed crew and the boat's obvious suitability for operations that avoided official scrutiny. Zara operated in the spaces between legal and illegal, providing services that governments couldn't officially acknowledge but privately relied upon. "Think about it," she said as Jax prepared for a careful dive to examine the cave system's deeper chambers. "You've found something that could rewrite archaeological textbooks, but only if you can protect it from people who see ancient wisdom as nothing more than collectible artifacts. Official channels provide limited security against international antiquities networks." I feigned consideration while secretly testing the micro-etched ring I'd taken from the astrolabe during our previous night's acoustic work. The ring was obviously some kind of calibration key, with notch patterns that corresponded to specific harmonic relationships. If I was right about its function, it would be essential for accessing the complete coordinate system encoded in the navigation network. The ring locked into the astrolabe's central mechanism with a soft click that nobody else heard over the boat's engine noise. Suddenly, the harmonic relationships we'd been detecting made perfect sense. The ring wasn't just a calibration tool, it was the master key that unlocked the network's full functionality. Without it, the acoustic coordinates would be accurate, but incomplete, missing the temporal adjustments that compensated for environmental changes across centuries. "Your offer is generous," I said carefully, "but I need time to consider the implications. This discovery belongs to humanity, not to whoever has the most sophisticated acquisition capabilities." Zara's smile was sharp, with appreciation. "Humanity is an idealistic concept, Miss Quinn. People are more practical, and they're motivated by interests that don't always align with cultural preservation. I'm offering protection from those interests, but protection requires trust." Jack surfaced from his preliminary dive with news that changed everything. The sea cave system included a natural chimney that connected back toward the coastal cliff face, probably emerging somewhere near the original Labyrinth site. A complete underground network that could provide discrete access between the maritime waypoint and the master resonance chamber. "Interesting," Zara mused, studying Jax's rough sketches of the cave system's architecture. Your Bronze Age navigation network includes escape routes and hidden connections. Someone built this system to remain secret, accessible only to people with the proper acoustic keys and coordinate calculations. She was right, and her recognition of the implications told me she understood exactly how valuable complete control of the network would be. Not just archaeological significance, but strategic advantage over anyone else seeking access to the remaining coordinate sites. The kind of exclusive information that could be leveraged for considerable profit through careful negotiation with the right collector. But I had the calibration ring, and without it, the acoustic cartography was impressive archaeology rather than functional navigation technology. As we headed back toward Kalliara's harbor, I realized that my false partnership with Zara would only work as long as she didn't understand what I'd already taken. "Tomorrow," I said as we approached the pier, "I'll leave you my decision about partnership terms." "Tomorrow," she agreed, "we'll discuss the practical realities of protecting discoveries from people who don't respect academic idealism." The threat was politely delivered, but perfectly clear: cooperation or consequences, with the choice framed as rational business calculation rather than moral decision. The kind of negotiation that assumed everyone operated according to the same practical ethic. But as I walked back toward the village with Jax providing casual escort, I knew that my decision had already been made. The Labyrinth's secrets would be protected, the navigation network would remain accessible to legitimate scholarship, and the Bronze Age builder's wisdom would outlast modern greed. I just needed to survive the next 48 hours long enough to make that protection permanent. The emergency cultural preservation order arrived at dawn, delivered by the same Mercedes-driving lawyers who'd attempted yesterday's intimidation through paperwork. This time, however, they brought television cameras and the kind of bureaucratic theater that transforms archaeological discovery into public spectacle. Konstantin Vesos himself had come to oversee the operation, emerging from a Range Rover with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to turning legal technicalities into commercial opportunities. Expensive casual wear, precisely styled silver hair, and the confident smile of a man who'd built an empire converting cultural heritage into luxury resort amenities. "Miss Quinn," he said, extending a hand that somehow managed to convey both greeting and ownership. "Konstantin Vesos, Vesos Development Group. I understand we have mutual interests in protecting this remarkable archaeological site from inappropriate exploitation." The mutual interests, as outlined in his emergency petition, involved joint custodial management of the Labyrinth under court-supervised archaeological survey. His team would provide funding, equipment and legal protection in exchange for collaborative research that would properly document the site's cultural significance before determining appropriate preservation strategies. It sounded almost noble if you ignored the fact that his previous preservation strategies had converted Byzantine churches into boutique hotels and Roman amphitheaters into private event venues. Cultural heritage as luxury branding, with archaeological significance measured primarily in terms of marketing potential. Inspector Marcoux arrived with reinforcements that suggested she'd anticipated complications. 3 additional officers, a heritage documentation specialist, and enough official paperwork to establish legitimate jurisdiction over whatever Vassos was attempting. Her expression conveyed professional irritation with bureaucratic manipulations, disguised as cultural stewardship. "Mr. Vassos," she said, examining his emergency petition with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen similar documents before. "Your legal filing claims imminent threat to archaeological integrity, but your proposed solution involves immediate access for commercial assessment teams." "That seems contradictory." "Not contradictory, Inspector. Comprehensive. My organization has extensive experience balancing cultural preservation with sustainable development. We're prepared to invest significant resources in protecting this site while ensuring it contributes to the local economy rather than becoming an administrative burden." The camera crews were already establishing positions for what would clearly be framed as a responsible development initiative, discovering and protecting ancient treasures. public relations theater designed to legitimize acquisition through community benefit narratives. But the morning's most interesting development was Zara's crew positioning themselves as contracted security specialists hired to provide site protection during the emergency survey period. Official contractors with proper documentation and insurance coverage, operating under Heritage Authority supervision, completely legal and utterly transparent about their commitment to cultural preservation. Fascinating how quickly everyone developed concern for archaeological integrity, I said to Marku as we watched the various factions establish their positions around the labyrinth. Fascinating how quickly archaeological integrity becomes a commercial opportunity, she replied grimly. But emergency preservation orders create legal obligations that work both ways. If this site contains significant cultural heritage, it receives full protection regardless of commercial interests. The solution was elegant and completely insane. I would conduct a public demonstration of the acoustic mapping system, performing the folio notation patterns that would reveal the labyrinth's navigational purpose, while cameras recorded everything for heritage documentation. Transparency as protection, with public witnesses ensuring that no single party could claim exclusive control over the discoveries. But transparency also meant revealing secrets that had been protected by silence for centuries. The bronze astrolabe, the acoustic cartography, the coordinate system that pointed to 10 other sites scattered across the Mediterranean. All of it would become public knowledge, accessible to anyone with sufficient resources and determination to locate the remaining navigation stations. I spent an hour preparing the demonstration while secretly implementing a more complex plan. Irina had provided specially marked resonant pebbles, innocent-looking stones that contained precise acoustic properties designed to interact with the labyrinth's existing harmonic system. When positioned correctly along the hairline crack that Thimble had been guarding, they would create specific interference patterns that could trigger controlled structural adjustment. Dr. Patel confirms the timing calculations, I announced to the assembled crowd, consulting my phone with theatrical significance. The labyrinth's breathing cycle peaks in approximately 12 minutes. That's when the acoustic demonstration will be most effective. Anya had indeed confirmed the timing, though not for the reasons I'd announced publicly. Her calculations indicated that maximum acoustic resonance would occur during the labyrinth's natural harmonic peak, when the combination of wind winds and structural resonance created optimal conditions for controlled rockfall along pre-stressed fracture lines. Vassos positioned himself for optimal camera angles, while his legal team established documentation protocols that would support future development claims. Zara's crew maintained professional distance while obviously cataloging every detail of the acoustic mapping system for their own purposes. Marku focused on heritage protection requirements while keeping everyone safely positioned for whatever was about to happen. I began the demonstration with simple tone sequences, using a portable amplification system to excite the labyrinth's basic harmonic responses. The stone rings sang with increasing complexity as I worked through the folio notation patterns, each sequence revealing new layers of the acoustic cartography that had remained hidden for millennia. Remarkable, Vassos said for the cameras, gesturing expansively at the resonating stone. This ancient navigation system represents exactly the kind of cultural treasure that deserves proper preservation and appropriate public access. The harmonic build-up continued according to plan, with the labyrinth's acoustic response growing stronger as natural wind patterns combined with the structured sound sequences I was performing. But the real action was happening where nobody was looking, along the hairline crack where my carefully positioned pebbles were beginning to resonate with frequencies that would destabilize precisely the right section of stonework. Thimble appeared at exactly the predicted moment, padding to the top of the wall section directly above the crack. The cat's timing was perfect, positioning itself as a visual warning that something important was about to shift, a living omen that anyone paying attention would recognize as significant. The final sequence requires precise timing, I announced, consulting instruments that were actually monitoring the structural resonance building along the crack. Everyone should maintain safe distance while the acoustic mapping reaches peak intensity. I initiated the controlled frequency sweep that would trigger everything we'd prepared. The Labyrinth's response was immediate and spectacular, a harmonic chord that seemed to make the very air vibrate with Bronze Age mathematics. Every stone ring sang in perfect synchronization, creating standing wave patterns that revealed the site's true purpose with crystalline clarity. For 30 seconds, the assembled crowd witnessed acoustic cartography in its full glory, ancient technology that converted sound into spatial coordinates, navigational wisdom that could guide travelers across hundreds of miles of open water using nothing more than human voices and architectural mathematics. Then everything shifted exactly as planned, and the real performance began. The controlled resonance reached its calculated peak, just as Thimble leaped from the wall section with the fluid grace of something that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The cat's movement was the final signal I'd been watching for, confirmation that the structural harmonics had reached the precise frequency that would trigger everything we'd prepared. The rockfall wasn't dramatic, no thunderous collapse or billowing dust clouds that would suggest disaster to the watching cameras. Instead, it was surgically precise, a section of the inner wall settling into a new configuration that sealed the formal spiral staircase while simultaneously opening the hairline crack that had been widening under acoustic pressure for the past hour. "Everyone back," Marku shouted, her training taking over as she recognized structural movement that could escalate unpredictably. "Clear the area until we can assess stability." The crowd scattered with the controlled panic of people who understood that ancient stonework plus harmonic resonance could equal unpredictable consequences. Vasalsi's cameras captured everything, his legal team already calculating how emergency structural concerns might affect development rights and cultural preservation obligations. But in the confusion of dust and shouting voices, nobody noticed three figures slipping through the newly opened seam in the outer wall. Jax had positioned himself perfectly, appearing beside me with a slim pack containing everything we'd need for the next phase. Thimble materialized at the gap with the timing of something that had rehearsed this escape for years, rather than hours. "Tight squeeze," Jax murmured, examining the opening that led into darkness. "But it connects to the breather system I mapped yesterday. Should bring us out at the sea caves within 20 minutes if we move fast." I took one last look at the crowd of officials, lawyers, and opportunists arguing over jurisdiction and safety protocols around what remained of the Labyrinth's formal entrance. They'd find enough authentic archaeology to keep them occupied: bronze fragments, stone carvings, and evidence of the acoustic mapping system that would generate years of legitimate research and academic papers. But they wouldn't find the calibration ring that made the system functional rather than merely historical. And they wouldn't find the complete folio copies I'd photographed during our controlled survey, the notation patterns that could unlock the remaining sites in the Mediterranean network. "Time to go," I said quietly, activating my recorder one final time to capture what happened next. The crawl space behind the wall was exactly what Jax had predicted, a natural passage that Bronze Age engineers had enhanced with careful stonework to create a discrete connection between the Labyrinth and the sea cave system. The air smelled of salt and deep stone, with subtle current flows that indicated we were following a route that had been designed for exactly this kind of emergency transit. Thimble took the lead, padding confidently through passages that twisted and branched in ways that would have been impossible to navigate without a guide. The cat moved with the assured familiarity of something that had been exploring these tunnels for years, pausing at intersections to ensure we followed the correct path toward the coast. "Smart animal," Jax observed, following the cat's guidance through sections where carved symbols marked critical turns. "Acts like it's been waiting for someone who knew how to listen to the Labyrinth's real voice." The tunnel system revealed itself as another layer of the Bronze Age navigation network. Waypoint markers carved into the walls at precise intervals, acoustic chambers positioned to relay sound signals between the inland resonance station and the maritime waypoint system. A complete underground communication network that could guide travelers across the Mediterranean using nothing more sophisticated than human voices and engineered stone. "They thought of everything," I said, recording the wall carvings as we moved toward what felt like growing air circulation. Emergency routes, communication systems, backup navigation protocols. This wasn't just ancient technology, it was ancient technology designed to survive disruption and interference. We emerged from the cliff face, through an opening so perfectly camouflaged it would be invisible from more than 20 feet away. The sea cave system spread before us in the pre-dawn darkness, natural limestone chambers enhanced with human engineering to create acoustic amplification networks that could broadcast navigation signals across miles of open water. This was where the real test would happen. With the calibration ring and the complete notation system, I could finally perform the master acoustic sequence that would unlock the navigation network's full functionality. Not just coordinate calculations for individual sites, but the temporal calibration system that compensated for centuries of environmental change. I assembled the portable equipment we brought, speaker arrays, recording devices, and the bronze astrolabe ring that I'd kept hidden throughout the public demonstration. Jacks rigged safety lines and established watch positions, while Thimble settled on a stone ledge, positioned for optimal observation of whatever was about to unfold. Petal's calculations indicate optimal acoustic conditions in about 6 minutes, I announced, consulting my phone where Anya had confirmed the tidal and atmospheric parameters that would maximize the sea cave system's resonant response. The master sequence was unlike anything I'd attempted before. Instead of simple tone patterns, it required complex harmonic relationships that used the natural acoustics of both the sea caves and the distant labyrinth chamber to create interference patterns that would reveal the complete coordinate system. When I initiated the sequence, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The sea cave system sang with mathematical precision that made my previous acoustic tests seem like amateur fumbling. Standing waves formed at perfect nodes throughout the chambers, creating harmonic relationships that revealed not just spatial coordinates, but temporal calibrations that had been encoded in Bronze Age stone. "My God," I whispered, recording everything as the acoustic cartography revealed its full complexity. It's not just navigation. It's chronographically accurate navigation. They built a system that could compensate for stellar precession, tidal variations, even atmospheric changes that would affect acoustic propagation over centuries. The complete master pattern downloaded itself into my recording equipment with crystalline clarity. 11 sites scattered across the Mediterranean, each one precisely located and temporally calibrated to function as part of an integrated navigation network. The Bronze Age builders had created acoustic GPS that could guide travelers across the ancient world using nothing more than carefully tuned stone chambers and human voices. As the sequence concluded, and the sea caves returned to natural silence, I realized that something had changed in the acoustic environment. The distant sound of voices and vehicle engines from the Labyrinth site had been replaced by something much closer, the whisper of marine engines approaching through the pre-dawn darkness. Company Jacks announced, recognizing the sound signature of Zara's boat before it became visible. But they're maintaining distance, professional courtesy, not interception. Zara's voice came across the water amplified by a marine hailer, clear and respectful. "Impressive work, Ms. Quinn. Clean extraction, complete data recovery, and minimal collateral damage. That was professional-grade archaeological heist, executed with genuine cultural preservation ethics." I could see her boat silhouetted against the horizon, positioned to observe but not interfere. Her crew was obviously capable of interception if she'd chosen to exercise that option, but instead she'd maintained the boundaries that marked the difference between criminal opportunism and professional respect for competence. "I assume you've secured what you came for," she asked. "I've secured what belongs to humanity," I called back across the water. "The rest is negotiable." Her laugh carried genuine appreciation. "In that case, Miss Quinn, consider this a professional courtesy between colleagues who understand the difference between preservation and You've earned safe passage, but remember you'll need allies for what comes next." The boat disappeared into the darkness, leaving us alone with the sea caves and the weight of what we'd accomplished. The complete acoustic mapping system was now documented and secured, protected from both commercial exploitation and administrative bureaucracy that might delay proper, scholarly analysis. But more than that, I'd found something that Sarah would have understood immediately, a way of listening to the world that revealed hidden connections and navigational wisdom that could guide travelers across vast distances. Ancient technology based on the same principles that had driven her research into marine mammal communication, the idea that sound could carry information across spaces too large for any other medium. The inflatable boat that Jax produced from its hiding place behind old fishing nets was the kind of equipment that suggested he'd been planning contingencies for situations that required discreet maritime transit. Military surplus converted for civilian use, with modifications that prioritized stealth and reliability over speed or comfort. Backup plan, he explained, checking the electric motor that would provide silent propulsion away from the sea cave system. Old habits from salvage diving days, when you sometimes needed to leave areas quietly and without official documentation. We loaded the essential equipment recording devices, the calibration ring and folio copies that contained the complete acoustic mapping system for the Mediterranean navigation network. Everything else could be replaced or reconstructed, but these materials represented the only existing record of functional Bronze Age navigation technology. Thimble settled into the bow with the dignity of a ship's cat accepting familiar duties. The small tabby had somehow acquired the status of expedition member rather than local wildlife, and its presence felt essential to whatever came next. Guardian spirit or practical mascot, the cat had earned its place in the continuing story. As we moved away from the sea caves toward a secondary pier on the far side of the island, I performed one final test of the acoustic mapping system. The calibration ring, properly positioned and acoustically activated, revealed harmonic relationships that confirmed the complete functionality of the navigation network. 11 sites, precisely located and temporally calibrated, each one capable of providing acoustic guidance across hundreds of miles of open water. Perfect resolution, I said, reviewing the recorded data with something approaching awe. Complete coordinate system, temporal calibrations, even backup protocols for environmental variations that could affect acoustic propagation. This represents navigation technology that wouldn't be matched until satellite systems in the 20th century. But the master pattern revealed something else, something that transformed archaeological discovery into personal connection. Hidden within the harmonic structure of the complete network was a memorial layer, acoustic signatures that resolved into something resembling names when the full system sang together. The original builders had embedded their identities into the navigation network, creating a memorial that could only be heard when all 12 sites resonated in perfect synchronization. Anya was right, I said softly, thinking about her final insight during our video consultation. The acoustic cartography includes a memorial function. When all the sites are properly activated, the harmonic interference patterns spell out names, probably the master navigators who designed and built the network. It was a discovery that connected directly to my own grief and Sarah's memory. The Bronze Age builders had understood that navigation systems weren't just functional tools. They were ways of remembering people who had guided others across dangerous waters. The Labyrinth network was simultaneously practical technology and cultural memorial, acoustic architecture that preserved both spatial knowledge and human identity across millennia. My sister would have loved this, I said, more to myself than to Jack. She spent years trying to decode communication systems that marine mammals use to navigate across oceanic distances. This is the same principle, but implemented in stone instead of biology. We reached the secondary pier as dawn began to lighten the eastern horizon. Irina was waiting with news that changed the legal landscape around our discovery. The emergency preservation order had been modified to freeze all excavation activities pending comprehensive archaeological survey, buying time for proper scholarly analysis while preventing immediate commercial exploitation. The court recognized that your acoustic demonstration proved significant cultural heritage value, she explained, helping us transfer equipment to a borrowed Land Rover. Vassos's development plans are suspended indefinitely, and the site receives full heritage protection under international cultural preservation protocols. More importantly, she'd been working with colleagues to establish a non-profit research foundation that could hold custodial responsibility for the navigation network discoveries. Academic oversight with transparent funding and open publication of research findings. Protection through legitimate scholarship, rather than legal technicalities or commercial agreements. Dr. Patel has agreed to serve as primary acoustic consultant, Arena continued, and Inspector Marku has volunteered to coordinate heritage protection services for the remaining sites as they're located and documented. We're calling it the Covenant of Echoes, a research framework based on the principles you've demonstrated here. The name felt perfect, connecting the acoustic nature of the discovery with the ethical commitments that would govern future exploration. Not ownership or control, but stewardship based on listening to what the ancient builders had been trying to communicate across centuries of silence. We spent the morning in a borrowed boathouse that Jax had converted into a temporary analysis station. Basic equipment, but sufficient for documenting the complete master pattern and beginning the process of coordinate verification for the remaining sites in the network. Academic archaeology conducted under proper protocols, with full documentation and transparent sharing of discoveries. The second site coordinates pointed to a location near Crete, where underwater archaeology had already identified anomalous stone structures that might represent modified sea caves. The third indicated somewhere along the Turkish coast that aligned with known ancient harbor installations. Each location would require careful investigation, but the acoustic mapping system provided precise starting points for exploration that could have taken decades of conventional archaeological survey. Zara sent coordinates for site number 4, Marku announced, consulting her secure messaging system with professional amusement. Apparently, she considers this a professional courtesy between colleagues who understand cultural preservation ethics. The message was brief and characteristically precise. Sicily 37.2002. It was exactly the kind of information that would have taken months of archival research and field survey to develop independently. Zara had essentially provided a research gift that demonstrated her commitment to the collaborative approach we'd established, even though she operated outside official academic channels. Interesting woman, Marku observed. Criminal methodology applied to cultural preservation goals. She could have taken everything by force, but chose partnership instead. That suggests principles that go beyond mere profit calculation. I thought about Zara's parting words about needing allies for what came next. The navigation network represented discoveries that would attract international attention from people who didn't necessarily respect academic ethics or cultural preservation commitments. Protection through official channels would be important, but it might not be sufficient against operators who worked outside legal boundaries. As afternoon settled into evening, I found myself sitting beside the harbor with thimble curled in my lap, watching fishing boats return from the day's work. The weight of discovery was balanced by the satisfaction of having protected something precious from exploitation while making it available for legitimate scholarship. But more than that, I'd found a way to transform grief into purpose that felt authentically connected to Sarah's memory. She'd spent her life trying to understand how creatures used acoustic communication to navigate vast distances. Now I'd found evidence that human beings had developed similar technologies in the Bronze Age, encoding spatial and temporal information in acoustic systems that could guide travelers across the Mediterranean world. The master recording contained her voice, captured during one of our video consultations when she'd helped decode the harmonic relationships that made the navigation system functional. Sarah's expertise in acoustic analysis had become part of the archive, embedded in the discovery that would carry forward her commitment to understanding how sound creates meaning across space and time. Tomorrow, I said to Thimble, who purred in response to the familiar rhythm of my voice, we start planning the next site exploration. The cat's purr harmonized with the harbor's evening sounds, boat engines, water against stone, voices calling across distances that seemed small compared to what we'd learned to navigate using Bronze Age wisdom and modern listening skills. The boathouse had been transformed into something between archaeological laboratory and recording studio. Equipment borrowed from 3 different institutions, documentation systems that could satisfy both academic requirements and heritage protection protocols, and communication arrays that kept us connected to colleagues scattered across the Mediterranean region. 2 weeks after the Labyrinth discovery, we'd established the operational framework that would govern exploration of the remaining sites in the acoustic navigation network. The Covenant of Echoes had grown from informal collaboration into an international research initiative with funding from cultural preservation organizations and academic institutions that recognized the significance of Bronze Age acoustic cartography. Site confirmations from Sicily and Cyprus, Anya announced via video link from Delhi, where she'd been coordinating acoustic analysis with maritime archaeology teams from 3 different universities. Both locations show clear evidence of engineered acoustic enhancement consistent with your navigation network model. The discoveries were accumulating faster than we'd expected. Once scholars knew what to look for, modified sea caves with precise harmonic ratio stone chambers designed to amplify and focus sound waves. Waypoint markers that indicated acoustic bearing relationships. The Mediterranean archaeological record revealed evidence of the navigation network that had been overlooked for decades. Volkov reports similar findings from the Cyclades survey. Marku added, consulting reports from field teams that were investigating coordinates provided by the master acoustic mapping system. 3 additional sites confirmed, with acoustic signatures that match your calibration calculations exactly. Irina had taken responsibility for coordinating the metallurgical analysis that was revealing the temporal calibration system encoded in the bronze instruments. Each site's astrolabe fragments showed evidence of chronographic adjustments that accounted for stellar precession, tidal variations, and atmospheric changes that would affect acoustic propagation over centuries of use. Remarkable sophistication, she said, reviewing spectrographic data that showed micro-variations in alloy composition corresponding to temporal adjustment algorithms. These Bronze Age engineers understood acoustic physics and astronomical mathematics that wouldn't be formally rediscovered until the Renaissance. But the most significant development had come from an unexpected source. Petros, the municipal clerk, who'd processed my original land purchase, had quietly provided a fragment of Byzantine monastery records that mentioned memory theatres and stone choirs associated with sites that corresponded exactly to our acoustic cartography coordinates. Continuous use, he explained, looking slightly embarrassed by his contribution to international archaeological research. The navigation network wasn't abandoned after the Bronze Age collapse. Medieval monks maintained some of the sites as architectural acoustics for religious purposes, probably without understanding the original navigation function. This historical continuity explained why the acoustic mapping system remained functional after centuries of environmental change. Monastic communities had preserved the stone chambers as sacred spaces, maintaining the precise architectural relationships that made the acoustic cartography possible even when the original navigation purpose had been forgotten. The discovery had personal implications that went beyond academic excitement. The memorial layer embedded in the master harmonic pattern had revealed itself more clearly as additional sites came online. Names that resolved from acoustic interference when multiple locations resonated together, creating a distributed memorial that could only be heard when the network functioned as designed. 12 names, I said, reviewing the acoustic analysis that had decoded the memorial signatures. The original master navigators, their identities preserved in harmonic relationships that span the Mediterranean Sea, including spaces for names that haven't been activated yet. The implication was clear. The network had been designed to grow, to accommodate additional navigators whose acoustic signatures would be added to the memorial layer as new sites were established. A continuing tradition of remembrance through functional architecture, where human memory became inseparable from practical navigation technology. I'd been working on something that felt important enough to warrant Sarah's inclusion in that memorial tradition, not as appropriation of ancient culture, but as recognition that her research into acoustic communication across vast distances represented the same fundamental insights that had motivated the Bronze Age builders. The next recording session will include temporal coordinates for a contemporary addition to the memorial layer, I announced to the assembled team. My sister's research into marine mammal acoustic navigation represents legitimate continuation of the work that created this network. Her voice deserves to be part of the archive. Nobody objected. Academic research had become personal mission in ways that honored both ancient wisdom and contemporary loss. The navigation network would continue to grow, adding new voices and new insights, while preserving the acoustic cartography that had guided travelers across dangerous waters for millennia. Thimble had claimed permanent residence in the boathouse, establishing a sleeping spot among the recording equipment where the cat could supervise all activities with appropriate feline authority. The small tabby had somehow acquired official status as expedition mascot, appearing in photographs and documentation reports with the dignity of something that understood its role in protecting important discovery. "Smart animal," Jax observed, watching the cat test the acoustic properties of each new piece of equipment before allowing it to be deployed. "Acts like it knows the difference between authentic archaeology and commercial exploitation." The afternoon brought news that would test our commitment to ethical archaeology versus expedient research. Zara had sent coordinates for the final 3 sites in the network, along with an offer that mixed legitimate scholarship with practical realities that academic institutions couldn't officially acknowledge. Sites 9-11 located in politically complicated jurisdictions. Official academic access may require years of bureaucratic negotiation. Unofficial consultation available for researchers who understand discrete methodology. Professional courtesy extended to colleagues who respect cultural preservation over commercial exploitation. ZX. It was exactly the kind of offer that tested the boundaries between pure scholarship and practical necessity. The remaining sites were apparently located in areas where official archaeological permits would be difficult or impossible to obtain through normal diplomatic channels, but where informal access might be possible through people who operated outside conventional legal boundaries. "Interesting ethical problem," Marku observed, reviewing Zara's message with the careful attention of someone who understood both law enforcement priorities and cultural preservation necessities. "She's offering to complete your research through methods that can't be officially endorsed, but might be the only practical way to access locations that would otherwise remain unexplored." The decision would determine whether the Covenant of Echoes remained purely academic or evolved into something that balanced scholarly ethics with practical effectiveness in protecting cultural heritage from people who didn't respect either scholarship or ethics. I made the call that felt most consistent with Sarah's approach to research that mattered enough to take calculated risks. "We work with anyone who demonstrates genuine commitment to cultural preservation, regardless of their methodology. The navigation network belongs to humanity, not to bureaucracies that might delay access for decades." As sunset approached, I found myself recording a final entry for the day's documentation. Personal reflection rather than technical analysis, but important enough to preserve as part of the archive that would guide future exploration of the acoustic cartography network. 3 weeks ago, I bought a parcel of Greek stones for 85 cents because silence had become unbearable. Now I'm coordinating international archaeological research that could rewrite understanding of Bronze Age navigation technology. But more than that, I've found a way to transform grief into purpose that honors both ancient wisdom and contemporary loss. The recording equipment captured my voice with the same precision it had used to decode Bronze Age acoustic cartography, preserving words that would become part of the archive that future researchers would use to understand how the navigation network had been rediscovered and protected. Tomorrow we would set sail for Sicily, carrying equipment that could unlock acoustic secrets hidden in Mediterranean stone for over 3 millennia. The Covenant of Echoes had become more than research framework. It was a commitment to listening carefully enough to hear what the ancient builders had been trying to communicate across centuries of silence. The labyrinth's master pattern continued to pulse in my recording devices, patient and regular, waiting for travelers who understood that navigation was fundamentally about finding your way home through careful attention to the voices that had guided others across dangerous waters before you. Sarah's voice was part of that pattern now, embedded in the acoustic archive that would guide future exploration. She'd found her way into the memorial layer where Bronze Age navigators had preserved their identities in harmonic relationships that could be heard across the Mediterranean when the stone chambers sang together in perfect synchronization. The tide was turning, and tomorrow would bring new discoveries. But tonight, I sat beside the harbor with thimble purring in my lap, listening to the rhythm of waves against stone that had been teaching people to navigate by sound for longer than recorded history could remember. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.